All right, well, thanks everybody for coming in today. I come in from Canada, between Toronto and Montreal. I say I grew up in a freezer. I'm just hello to everybody and online as well. I can't see you, but welcome to the session as well. And now I'll do that in Welsh, hello. So this presentation is about elicitation and collaboration. How many times have we asked our stakeholders what they want, and they say, I don't know. You know, what do you want in your new system? I don't know. You go do something, go do a prototype, you put it in front of them, and they say, oh, that's not what I wanted, right? So it's tough to do. I love questions, so throughout this session, if you have a question, please keep it until the end, because I think I might be answering some of these questions as we're going through. But definitely, please bring your questions near the end, and also afterwards. I mean, for you introverts out there, if you have any additional questions that you want to ask me after the session, then just ping me on LinkedIn. Happy to answer. We also love feedback here at BITS. So I'm going to show this slide at the end of the session, and please give us some great feedback here about what you thought about the session. I'm a business analyst, project manager in IT. It's where I've spent the last 20 years. My specialization is actually in information and communications. So it's all about, for me, the information life cycle that hovers above the project and has a life cycle of its own as the SDLC is going along. And I try to bring in Lean Six Sigma concepts, efficiency concepts as shortcuts to quality communication. That's what I'm going to talk about. There's a lot of science behind this. I'm not going to get into the theory so much around the science, but just around the top strategies that you can use, the takeaways that you can bring into your job starting tomorrow. So, poor requirements. It's the #1 reason that IT projects fail. This is well documented, it's well known. Poor requirements, #1 reason that IT projects fail. Yet, we all know what a requirement is. Testable, concise, correct, understandable, atomic. Depending on what kind of requirement it is, if it's for an RFP, it's for a different, if it's for Agile versus Waterfall. But we all know what a requirement is. Given that we know what requirements are, and it's still the #1 reason that IT projects fail, then maybe it's not about the requirements part. Maybe it's about the elicitation part. We're going to get into the top 8 challenges in elicitation and top takeaways that you can use to mitigate those issues. The first thing that we need to acknowledge is that 80% of people in your meeting, in your workshops, are doing something else. This is from Project Management Institute 2022. So they're not even really in your meeting to begin with. They're somewhere else. I don't know what they're doing. They're making an espresso, walking the dog, having a massage, sleeping. I don't know what they're doing, but they're not in your meeting. And we actually know this because we do the same thing to other people. We're not fully present in their meetings either, on the phone, whatever. But to counter this dynamic, make sure that you actively engage stakeholders. Pull them into your meeting. This is something new that we have to do. So how do we do this? We're going to add their names to agenda items, send out in advance, so they're focused for that part of the meeting at least. The less we require of them, the more we're going to get of them. Share the mic a lot. Ask specific questions. Sarah, what do you think? Ali, what do you think? Pull them in. Manage it like a classroom. And the more that you do this, the more that you call on them, the more they're going to get used to the idea that they should stay in your meeting and not somewhere else. So you want to check their pulse every few minutes. Ask them questions, get feedback. Even if you don't really want the feedback, do it anyway. Pull them in. So this is really important. And also have shorter meetings. I mean, we're going to do a lot more prep outside of the meeting, so we're reducing the online time that we require of people. Challenge #2, 65% of people are visual, but most meetings are verbal. Think about the meetings that you attend. How many of them are just somebody talking? no visuals, no PowerPoint, no screen sharing, nothing. So since most people are visual learners, doesn't it make the most sense that we appeal to the way that most people process information, which is us? You know, it's higher in IT. Because when you don't have visual support, like now, people get distracted, uncomfortable, look around, okay? And when we are only using a verbal style, we are appealing to 30% of people in the room. And what's that like for you? When you do all of this preparation for your meetings and your workshops, and you're only reaching 30% at best, because we know that they're doing something else. We know that there may be noise in the background, somebody walking the dog, you know, whatever it is. 30% at best, after you've done all this preparation for your elicitation. So that's why, making a little bit of effort, making it verbal and visual, we're moving up our chances from 30% to 95% to grab their attention and their ability to absorb the information that we're giving. Now, here's the interesting thing. They will never know that they're not absorbing information that you give. Because at the end of the meeting, you say, did everybody understand? Any questions? And everybody's nodding. Yeah, no questions, I understand. You will only ever know when you get their feedback, when they start to respond to your questions and comment on your requirements. So they don't know what they don't know. You don't know what they don't know. And the only way to really combat this is using a verbal and a visual technique. It doesn't have to be elaborate, it doesn't have to take a lot of time. If you're sharing a PowerPoint, you're sharing your screen from a requirements management tool, that's fine. Give them something to look at. Another aspect of verbal and visual is whether you decide to take your notes in front of people or not. Being very, very deliberate about this. On screen, in front of people, your objective might be to, number one is to give them verbal and visual. But it also might be to slow down the meeting. How many meetings have we been in where the conversation and discussion takes off and we haven't caught up? But they don't know that we haven't caught up because they can't see our notes. Very simple technique. The other reason that we want to show our notes is for our stakeholders to verify the accuracy immediately, helping us avoid another review cycle. Okay, so who doesn't want that? Increase quality, increase comprehension, increase all of that just by showing our notes. Off-screen, maybe there's a good reason that we want to take notes off-screen. Maybe some of them are private, IT auditors, they want to take their screen, their notes off-screen. I actually, even when I have notes that are not for public consumption, I have two sets of notes. I have the ones that I show on screen, and then I have some side ones that are private and I need to follow up with different stakeholders or I see different risks in the project. So add visual and verbal to all your elicitation interactions with stakeholders. Challenge number 3 is people are different. We know this. So know who you have in the room. Plan and mitigate for this. Introverts versus extroverts. If extroverts drown the introverts, have some mitigation strategies around this. Know if English is going to be a challenge for some of your stakeholders. Send the questions in advance. Slow down the meeting. Use visuals. Because, like before, they won't know what they don't know, and neither will you know what they don't know. So, consider always that people are different. And people really are just so different, aren't they? And we interact with people all the time, from one end of the project right to the other. And it's amazing to me, not that the world works as it does, but really how well it works, considering how different we all are. And because people are different, we are naturally prone to communication errors. This is what I hear a lot from technical people. What we know about communication errors is they're a little bit like interest. They compound. You know, we start off with one, then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it's like bad data. It's used here, and then it's used somewhere else, and it just gets bigger and bigger like a snowball. And the best thing that we can do, better than correcting a communication mistake, is actually making sure it doesn't occur in the first place. And that's what the strategies I'm giving you today. As a solution to how different we all are, don't assume that stakeholders understand your topic, or have a background, or know what a requirement is. Consider this. The person with the least technical knowledge in the room might be the person with the most money, might be the funder, might be the sponsor. I mean, how many times have we come across that? And people are very shy in a group setting about saying they don't understand something. So I start at zero. I identify in advance of the meeting and the workshop what the level and the baseline of the people might be who I decide to put in one particular meeting, what kind of subgroup of stakeholders I have, and I help them get up to speed. I help them understand what a requirement is and what it isn't, so they're not bringing that into the workshop where I want to actually get good requirements and not be sidetracked and distracted teaching people what a requirement is. Challenge number 4 is failure actually happens before you get into the room. Not in the room, it's before. Because maybe we don't know our stakeholders well enough. Maybe you have the wrong people in the room. Maybe you're only having a verbal meeting, not a verbal and a visual. So what happens before you get into the room? And one of the things that we can do, and I do this regularly, is a mini-stakeholder analysis. All the time. Any interaction that I have with somebody, I do a mini-stakeholder analysis. I want to know who they are. I want to know, do they have, what do they know or don't know? What's the level of interest, influence, impact on this project or on this deliverable that I'm working on? Okay? If they are executives, they probably have 10 minutes for me. I better keep it at the high level. If they're a frontline worker whose job it is and a new system is coming to replace their old system, I can have detailed discussions with them. So do this mini-stakeholder analysis in your head, and it shapes every interaction that you have and how you want to approach your stakeholders and get the most out of them. Attitudes and belief, that's an interesting one because, you know, we often come across difficult stakeholders. I don't want to say difficult because I always say there's difficult situations and not difficult people, a maxim that I really hold dearly. But attitudes and beliefs, I worked with one individual, her name was Linda. That is her real name, but she's not here, she's in Canada. And Linda was very difficult in these workshops. She would drown other people out. I was there trying to get requirements, but she was drowning everybody out. She was silencing people. Now we would call that bullying, what she was doing. But I didn't know what to do with her because she had a lot of knowledge, she had a lot of influence, a lot of impact. So here's where she was being mapped out of my stakeholder analysis. And what I decided to do with Linda is pull her out of that workshop and give her her own meeting. And this is what I said to her. I said, Linda, you have so much knowledge. And I'm afraid I'm not getting all of it in these short meetings that we have. And I want to meet with you separately. Would you be okay with that? And of course, Linda was flattered. And that's how I was able to get her out of that meeting. And then everybody else was feeling free to talk again. So analyze your stakeholder dynamics, really important. So successful communication, it happens before you start. That's where it happens. Challenge number 5. Good interviews are tough to do. Some people, that's their entire job, their entire life. They are interviewing, they are good at it. Journalists, detectives, healthcare professionals. So it's hard to do if you're not formally trained in it. And I have a background in journalism and communications. I prepared spokespeople for national interviews with the press. I'm going to share a few of these strategies today. So I consider 2 different styles of communication and interviewing with stakeholders, what I call waterfall and agile. Waterfall, all your questions are written out in advance. You don't deviate from that. Your session is a question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. You get all your responses, and that's the way you consider a success, is when you get responses to all of your questions. No blank answers on the page. There's pros and cons to Waterfall. The pro, obviously, is that it's easy to do. You have all your questions, get answers, you don't forget any. It's good if we're new at interviewing. But the con as a communication method is that it's not flexible. You can't change on the fly. As context changes, environment changes, factors come in that change the situation. So, pros and cons. Agile, don't we all want to be agile these days? Agile, you have your list of questions, but depending on the response of the stakeholder, you may adjust the next question or even skip questions. What are the pros and cons of Agile is that you can adjust to changing circumstances and context on the fly. It's more interactive, right? I mean, why are we even meeting with people if we're doing it the Waterfall way? Just send it over the email. The con of this is it is a harder communication style to do, interview style. We may miss questions. We need to think on our feet. We have sharp listening skills, and it takes experience. But that's ultimately maybe where we want to go. And maybe we even want to try a hybrid style. So we have a list of questions, and we're willing to once in a while mix it up. So we've all seen good interviews and bad interviews in the media. What's the difference? It's not the subject, it's the interviewer. Think about that. And it's of enormous benefit to you if you can learn more about interviewing. I have an entire session on interviewing, actually, and I'm giving it to the International Institute of Business Analysis next week. 600 people registered. It's a big demand topic, and I hope maybe to come back and give a session on that to BITS. So let's take this theoretical of Waterfall and Agile and put it into practical. As an example, let's suppose that somebody wants an apple. That's the requirement. An apple. Okay. So now we need to clarify the requirements. We need to do our elicitation. And, we're going to ask questions like, why do you want this apple? Why don't you want something else, like a banana? What size of apple? AI tools are helping us more and more with getting rid of fuzzy language. So, what size of apple? Large. Well, what does large mean to you? What color is the apple? Red, green? What variety? There's over 7,500 varieties of apples. So we can start listing them. 7,500. Is it local or imported, organic? How do you want it prepared? Do you want it sliced up? Do you want it cooked? Do you want some cinnamon on it? It can go on, and this is a very painful interview for your subject. But if we follow the tips that I'm giving you, here's what this interview might look like instead. Before I get into that room with the stakeholder, who I learn is a busy doctor who has his own holistic medicine clinic, I find out from his assistant the reason that he wants the apple as opposed to something else, another fruit, is that he's always on the run. He doesn't have time for lunch. Bananas have gotten squished in his bag, and who can eat that? So he wants an apple. It's sturdy, it's sturdy, it's hardy, and easy to port around. Now, I know that he lives in an apple-growing area of Ontario, so I consider maybe he wants a local apple. He's a doctor, he's into holistic, maybe he wants an organic apple. And so I narrow the list of 7,500 possibilities down to about 3 and see what he thinks. I also have some other options lined up based on some other variables, like cost. Not that cost matters to a doctor, but I line up some other variables for the doctor. And so now, when I go into that interview, I'm not asking 100 questions. I'm not listing 7,500 varieties of apples in front of this poor man. I'm making my interview shorter. And that's how I want to think about interviews. And that's how I want you to think about them. How can I make it shorter? How can I get this information myself? How can I do the research to get rid of questions? How can I optimize their time? Don't start at zero. Interviewing is the #1 way that we get information, either one-on-one or in a group. Really, really impactful. Challenge number 6 is the wrong tool for the job. And I don't mean requirements management tools, Jira, DevOps, modern requirements, whatever you're using. I mean tools and techniques for elicitation, to pull that information out of stakeholders before it goes into a requirements management tool. Miro is one tool that I'm seeing a lot of. So here's a Miro board from Miro itself. So it's actually a really nice looking board. And I'm sure your boards don't look like this. At least mine don't, okay? I like Miro for short-term live collaboration. That's how I like Miro. But let me tell you about a friend of mine who had an experience with Miro. So she was a technical writer. There was a Miro session at work, and so all kinds of words and concepts and arrows drawn and colors and shapes and everything else. And then it was handed to her. She never had a chance to attend the meeting. She wasn't invited. But this Miro board was handed to her, and they said, we want you to create a user guide out of this Miro board. And she said, what? You know, because you could have one word that could represent an hour-long discussion. She doesn't know what's important, what isn't. It's the wrong tool for the job. So it would have been better if she attended the meeting, if they invited her, but it would have been better even a recording of this Miro session, so she could follow the progression of the content and what has been dismissed and deleted and what is important and what was spent an hour on, or some context. Let's give her a chance. I had a similar experience with Miro. So the manager in the engineering department wanted to use Miro for requirements. Well, there's no control over content. Anybody can change anything at any time. You'll never know. There's no ability to do traceability. There's no version control. So the message is, use the right tool for the job. I approach communications from a scientific point of view, from a systems point of view. And here's a communications model that reflects the system of communication. And all I want to show on this one is that on the left we have us. So we're creating the message. And I noticed some people taking pictures. Take all the pictures you like. Please take pictures of everything if you like. I should have mentioned that sooner. So on the left we have us. We're creating the message, whatever it is. We're asking questions, we're doing our elicitation, we're asking for feedback and requirements, whatever we're doing. We need to deliberately choose the channel, the technique, and the tool. They all need to be deliberately chosen and not left to chance. Because as we saw in a couple of examples that I just gave you, it doesn't work. Even if you have the right channel, the right technique, if you have the wrong tool, it collapses the whole thing, and it doesn't work. Very deliberate choices. If you are, some people are writing requirements right into the requirements management tool. I'm not a complete fan of that method, but if you are doing that, at least share your screen, at least have an output that you can give people. Because on the other side, what we have here is we have stakeholders interpreting the message. And as we know, they are compromised by a lot of things. First of all, 80% are doing something else. They're multitasking. They are primarily visual learners, not verbal. We've got noise in the background across the bottom here. There's cultural differences, maybe ESL, geopolitical pressures. There's a lot of reasons why this model is compromised. And so these are very deliberate choices. Choosing the right tool for the job. Nothing left to chance. So another thing that could go wrong in our elicitation is that we have the wrong format for the job. Wrong format. What does that mean? Well, who cares what the email looks like? I sent it, didn't I? Wrong format. The average person reads 5,000 words a day or more. Maybe for us it's more. 2 million a year. Say we have a team of 10 people, so what's that? 20 million words a year? That's what's flowing through us and on our teams. And so a lot of people think it doesn't matter how we produce the message. It doesn't matter. It's just, it takes a lot of time to think about that. Well, it doesn't, by the way. I'm going to show you. But in fact, we do ourselves a disservice if this email is bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. There was a study done by a very prominent university. I can't remember if it was Harvard. But if the email goes back more than 3 times, we need to find another communication method because it's not going to get any better. And we've all seen those emails bounce back and forth 50 times, and then it's red highlight and yellow highlight and caps and font changes, and because we're trying to draw attention to that. So it's difficult when we're using the wrong format. So what do I mean by that? Here's an example of a before email, and it's about the knitting club. So I'll read it out. It's kind of small font. Hi, looking forward to seeing all of you on Thursday for the knitting club. We really need to get the elections done so we know who is president. Linda, can you bring the ballots? Tarek, see if you can find the privacy booths. And Alex, thanks for bringing the desserts. If you have any questions, let me know. It's a clear email, well written, short, nothing wrong with that. But look how it can be better. So now we're moving into structuring information. And you guys are good at this. This is like data, structuring information. It takes about 3 seconds to figure out who's bringing what. And even notice what I did in the subject line, I added people's names. And so they know exactly what they need to do. So remember, this is a very simple example, but we've got 20 million words that is flowing through our team every year. So we are increasing our ability for stakeholders to understand what we're trying to say when we structure information and think about information design. So here's another example, requirement. This is a real requirement that I got, and actually, there's nothing wrong with it. We need this requirement added to the system. The call center agents who answer the phone right now see how many calls they have in their own queue to answer, but also all the other calls for other agents. We don't want that. We just want them to be able to see their own number of calls waiting. It's very clear. But look what happens when we redesign it. So we've got current state, future state, and the change requested, which is to modify the reporting access so that agents can only view their own statistics. And actually, this change requested is not in A. So an entire piece of information, because everything was clumped together, it's not seen. So which status would a manager like? Of course, B. Of course. Well, look at B. Color coding, most important information is at the top. Work your way down to least important. Subject line says, green status. What manager wouldn't like that? So they can go and answer their 300 other emails. Again, it's all about structuring information, thinking about your audience. What do they need to know first? So it's form and function. And that's a universal concept, applies to information as well. And it's a very deliberate choice, and nothing is left to chance. So challenge number 8, this is the last one. We need to challenge ourselves to do better elicitation. And putting it all together, what I gave you today, is really continuous improvement. Okay? Plan, do, check, adjust. And it means for us in elicitation that we identify things that didn't go so well in that elicitation. And then we go back, we try to find the root cause and try to perfect that. And you might say, Pam, this is a lot of work, to do all these 8 challenges and solutions you're giving us. It's a lot of work. This communicating, this mitigating, this stakeholder analysis. And it's true. It is more work. But it's never as much time as the rework you have to do if you don't do it, as doing your work again, as getting people frustrated in that elicitation. I mean, it's really important to make it easier to get from A to B for our stakeholders and appeal to the way that they absorb information and process information. And that's a fact that's in the research. So if you can ace meeting facilitation, you can ace requirements elicitation. And I have 20 years behind me to say that that's true. And you can make this lady happy. So I'm going to go into questions now. I don't know if there's any questions. And by the way, please give us feedback on this session. We appreciate it. And also feel free to get in touch with me later if you have any other questions. Sometimes there's a certain scenario that's happening at work or among your team that maybe it doesn't feel so comfortable to bring that in front of a group of people. So please feel free to reach out to me. Any questions? Yes.
We have a question from online. Do you have any advice for those of us who are not particularly creative visually? You mentioned a lot about making visuals part of your presentation. How would you go about going into that if you're coming from a very logical data perspective? We might not have much in the way of visual presentation capabilities.
Sure, very good question. So the question being, if we are not inclined, we have a different background that is not in information design and visual design, we're very technical, what do we do? So some very easy tips is try to put, you're all data people, try to put the information in a table, because that will naturally organize it to make it easier for other people. It'll reduce the amount of words automatically that people are looking at. And then whenever you can reduce the amount of words and use that kind of as your guide, then you are increasing the ability for people to understand it and also understand it without the errors. Because there's fewer words to work with. So there's less room for error. Tables is a big one. Googling information design, going onto Google Images and looking at before and after for information design is a good tip. Even document design, if you Google that and find before and after images, you're going to get the idea of what people are looking at for information design. And maybe that's also thinking about the concepts of proximity and alignment. So proximity, whether it's spatial proximity, I'm looking at the audience here, and spatial proximity, I'm guessing that because you're sitting over here and you're sitting over here, you don't know each other. So there's no relationship there. But when you group elements together and you have that proximity, then you're assuming a relationship there. Okay, so proximity, think about proximity as one, and alignment. Groups, when you group data and you have elements of a data set that are aligned, so whether it's a bulleted list, it creates a set of information. Okay, so Google those kinds of concepts. They're not difficult. That's the wonderful thing about them, but they're very effective. Any other questions? Yes?
Hi, I just want to thank you for the wonderful talk. And I just have a quick question. What's your advice on meetings that can kind of get a little bit heated and when people start talking over each other and egos get, excited? Do you have any advice on that?
I do. So the question is, what if a meeting gets a little overheated, the discussion kind of gets a little out of hand? What can we do to manage that meeting now? So one of the things that you can do is, what I would encourage you to do is do some root cause analysis and try to figure out for yourself, well, does it always happen? Does it only happen when these two people come into a room? Figure out where the root cause is and then start mitigating. And sometimes it's only about, maybe somebody is, people don't like to talk about feelings at work, but it's all about feelings. And so sometimes it's because somebody is not feeling heard, okay? Maybe there's a bad history where somebody was not understood and their voice is not heard. But there's also, if this happens, you can also park the issue. So you can literally park it. You can say, well, we've only got 10 minutes left here, and I really feel that there's more to this discussion that I really want to dive in with both of you. So would it be okay with you, and we asked the question, would it be okay with you if we parked this for now and came back to it a little bit later? And then you are saying that you want to listen to them and you want to hear, but you're also saying it's not the right time for this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
Is that you walking an alpaca?
It is. and my husband, who's at the back of the room taking pictures of me, he's walking the goats. Any other questions? You're all here. You must have a question about elicitation. Yes?
How do you go about managing expectations of your audience? Because I speak to a lot of non-tech people about technical solutions. Sometimes they have the impression that technology is solving all problems. How do you personally go about managing expectations of that?
So managing expectations of the audience, of the stakeholders. Okay. So managing expectations is a really big topic, and I'm glad that you brought it up because inevitably somebody's going to complain, inevitably somebody's not happy, and it's to look for the project goals. So what did the project manager and the sponsor set as the goals, as the objectives? And one of the things that I do is I engage in messaging. So I determine what is my key messages, and this is brought over from the communications area, from the communications world, is what are my key messages that I need to keep repeating and so that they resonate with the stakeholders. And if managing expectations, if that's part of it, then at the beginning, even before you engage in your stakeholders, you want to identify, well, what are some of the communication challenges I'm going to have? Are people going to be unhappy about this? Is everybody happy about it? And then in your script, when you're in front of people, you can insert some of these key messages. And it might be that somebody is unhappy that we have a reduced scope. So the key messaging is that, well, as you know, there is a budget for this project, and we've identified the scope to be this and this and this, and the CEO has signed off on that. So let's move forward and look at this. And so they know it's not going to be unwrapped again. But that's the thing that I would do, is I would identify what are the key issues or problems that would come up, and setting expectations, and where people gonna kind of have some pain points on the project, and then identify some key messaging around that. And in communications, nobody does key messaging on their own, actually. So it's done as a group. So whether it's you and the project manager, or you and maybe a couple of people on your team, and you think, well, if this person says this, I mean, what is going to be our communication response? Like, we all need to be aligned, and so we're meeting their expectations. And sometimes I find, a lot of time actually, just listening to somebody goes a long way to resolving the issue. Because people want to feel respected, they want to be empathized with. I hope that helps. Okay, anybody else? You must have more questions. Online, any questions? Okay. Yes. So the question is about Miro and whether I would just use it as a quick tool, live collaboration, and then move into another tool. And it depends. It really does, because Miro can definitely, I would say that I agree with you. That's probably where I would use Miro, is as a short-term live collaboration tool. And then as quickly as possible, once the collaboration is over, get it into another tool. I personally, I know that Microsoft Word and Excel is not very sexy anymore, but I personally use Microsoft Word a lot because, it's free, there's no licensing issues, it's very portable, into different formats. It's something that everybody has, and you can track changes very, very well with reviewers. So you can have a history of that. When somebody in 6 months says, oh, well, who said that? Where did that come from? Well, I have a documented discussion around it in track changes. So But I mean, obviously there's better tools out there. As a consultant, I come onto projects and they often don't have requirements management tools, often. And so I need to make do with kind of some standard free things. And it works, it's more about the technology or the technique that you use rather than the tool. Yeah. Yes? So that's a great question. How do you ensure that the requirements that other people are signing off are accurate? And in some ways, that's in the eye of the beholder, what's accurate. What we can do is due diligence. I mean, I'm working on a project right now, and they don't have a requirements management tool, but it's a national organization. And so the way that I do my due diligence is it's a licensure system. I mean, it's a regulatory body. I can tell you what it is. And so I'll search for a number of different keywords, like about 100 keywords, like letter, for example. And it'll show up in 20 different requirements, and I'll make sure that they're all aligned and there's no conflict between any of them. And then through that entire analysis that we actually have a complete treatment of letters and how they're being created and sent and the templates and candidate communication and so forth. But it's a really good question, and I think it begins with who's in the room and who's been identified to be in the room. So getting to know your stakeholders, getting to know what are their strengths, what are their capabilities, what do they know about the subject matter that they're commenting on. And if you've identified that somebody has been in the room that maybe they shouldn't be, or maybe they need a little help and we need a secondary stakeholder about that grouping of requirements, then I would probably encourage you to ask for that person and ask for that review. Because the thing that we don't want is we don't want the requirements signed off and then we build a prototype and then send it to them and then they say, oh, well, this is not what I wanted. And we say, well, it is what you asked for. You signed off on the requirements. But it's one of those things that, if you are taking advantage of the tips that I've given you today in terms of like verbal and visual and showing notes in front of the stakeholders, grabbing people, pulling them in by name into your meeting, if you're doing all this kind of mitigation, I swear this will go a long way to making sure those requirements are complete so that they really are ready to be signed off. Anybody else? How much time do we have left? 7 minutes. It's going to be a long 7 minutes if you don't ask questions.
You got any funny anecdotes, any funny stories about any of these pieces?
Funny stories about requirements. What I can do is I can share a little bit more. Not so funny, but, and I hope you take pictures of these slides as well. So questions for stakeholders about requirements, these are really some common ones that I ask. And what do you do on a daily basis? What are your pain points? What's your biggest problems? And getting them to talk, getting them to share. What does the ideal new system look like for you? What functionality does it have? Start out on a really positive note and say, in 2 years when this system is implemented, what's it doing for you? Like, what are you happy about? And then they can start talking and visioning, doing that vision with you. It's one funny story is about UAT. So I was leading a UAT session, and people are very hesitant, the stakeholders in the room, they're very hesitant to say anything negative about the system, because it's their colleagues and coworkers and they don't want to create any bad tension. So when I say, well, what are your pain points of the system? What are the bugs, defects? What did you come across? Silence. I thought, okay, well, that's not going to work. So I need an alternate form of communication. I always need a backup form of communication that I'm going to use in a meeting when I need it. It's like a process flow. We have our main happy flow, we have an exception flow, we have an alternate flows. And so then I thought, okay, I need to attack this a little bit differently. So I said, So we are leading this UAT session here. We're going to have this. We're going to talk about all the things that we don't like about the system. And you know, this is one of the rare times in your life where you're getting paid to complain. And the more you complain, the happier I'm going to be. So what I find wrong with the system, and then I rattled off a few things that I didn't like about it. And then that started to open people up because you're setting the tone, right? Really important that people have that confidence and that sense of safety, if you will. So what kind of data do you work with? Let's review the requirement, ensures it meets our standards. So for the other lady about the questions, about the requirements and the quality and the standards, if you can run through what are the standards for that style of requirement that you're doing, whether it's agile, waterfall, you're doing a requirement for an RFP, that's a little bit different. If you can run through that list for the requirements that you have and feel comfortable about it and put these ideas in front of the stakeholders, then you're on your way to a really good set of requirements. Questions for stakeholders about process development. So we do process development. We talk about the name of the process with a verb. You know, naming the process, it's actually the most important thing that you can do. Because if it is about account management, for example, that as a noun, it doesn't tell us very much. But if it's about creating account, modifying account, updating accounts, deleting accounts, so the verb is the most important thing when you name your processes and when you name your steps. When you're going through and you're naming steps, create an account, review an account, delete an account, okay? So keep that in mind. It's a very easy technique. I'm all about making things easy. And I hope you're taking pictures of this as well. You can also contact me after. I'll give you a complete copy of the presentation. And then we talk about pain points. We want to talk about, are there any manual processes that you might want to automate in the future? Any points of inefficiency? And we always want to look at people, process, and technology and what documents are associated all the time with every step, okay? So from IIBA, International Institute of Business Analysis, where I'm a senior member, you want to choose the techniques very carefully. We talked about that, but here's some more detail around that. And whether you are, whatever stage you're in, whatever style of SDLC you're using, and you want to understand the stakeholders very well. So information around that I'm happy to give you as well. And self-assessment, assessing your own capabilities, how comfortable you are, and where you might want to learn a little bit more, and getting ready for the elicitation session. All these things that you would want to do. Okay? And there's some references as well. I know you want to take a picture of that. Okay, so that's pretty much, I think we're at time as well. So thanks to everybody. I hope it was useful to you.